Hello, today I'm working on a background that I prepared earlier. This was a Neocolor and Neocolor 2, and I've started a little sketch that I'm now going to colour in, or start painting I should say, and talk a little bit about drawing and painting from imagination, which is what I do mostly. I tend to favour working without reference material, and I think the reason for that is I think over the years, from copying from source material, drawing from life, you pick up a kind of repertoire that you have in your hands, in your mind, that you kind of know how to paint these things. And quite often you can recall what you want to paint and bring it to mind, and then just put the paint down on the paper and get on with the job. And that's what I like to do. I like to paint from imagination, from this sort of internal repertoire that I've developed over the years. But you'll find that something else happens, and it's quite a mystery really, that things pop into your head and you end up putting something down on paper or on canvas even, that you hadn't really thought about or hadn't planned. And quite often when you look back, you think, well, where did that come from? Why did I choose that? Why did I choose this thing over another that I could have chosen? And I think this is what you end up developing your own personal vocabulary. I tend to paint subjects that are almost mystical. I like to paint things that don't have an obvious meaning, and I'm drawn to work that is like that, and it's often echoed in my own work. And so I find certain things I'll repeat. There are particular shapes that will be repeated. One of the things I like to do is add dots to things, and I don't know where that suddenly came from. It just arrived in a painting one day, and I've done it ever since, on and off. Obviously it's not something I constantly repeat. That would make it quite boring, but it surfaces now and again. Another thing is birds often come up in my paintings, and I think I've mentioned in one of my videos before that angels are a theme. They're not so much a part of the painting like a mark or a motif. They're a theme that come up in my paintings, and there is a story behind that, why this happened, why the angel came to me. It was the result of working in an old, having an exhibition in an old mortuary chapel some years ago. And it's obviously a decommissioned mortuary chapel, and it's a beautiful space, and I will share the full story of how that came about in another video, and show you some of the space itself, show you what it's like. It's often used by artists for exhibitions. Sometimes it's used for concerts. It's very old, and it's in Bath, where I used to live. And it's a beautiful place set in an old cemetery. So you're surrounded with these very, very old tombstones, some of which you can't read the inscriptions on them. They're that old. Some are broken, flowers are growing up around them. And despite the fact that, you might think it's a bit morbid being in a cemetery, but it's not. It's a very peaceful place, very pretty place, because the river is down at the bottom, where the land slopes away, and there's a river at the bottom, and there's a little bit of a park on the right hand side of the cemetery, and you often find people in there having a picnic from, you know, the offices that might be around, workplaces that are around that area. And years ago, a music concert was actually played there, and the Rolling Stones played there. But that's a whole other story, so I'll share that with you another time. Just to get back to this painting, as you can see, this was, as I said, this is all Neocolors too, so it's wax. So I'm painting water over the wax, and it's having this sort of streaky effect. And you do have to be careful with what paper you're painting on, because it can pill, because if you make the paper too wet. This is a sea white sketchbook, so it's almost like quite thick, or medium thickness I would say, cartridge paper. So it's not the best paper, but I quite fancied doing that on this paper just to see how it would hold up to a bit of watercolour wax and then watercolour over the wax. So again, this is another image that sort of came to mind as I was trying to think what to paint, and I don't really have a clear idea of where this is going. I'm just basically just putting paint down on paper and seeing what emerges from that. But I hope you can tell that it's a female figure with flowing hair, or it might even turn out to be a headdress yet. That's one of the things that happens when you paint from your imagination. You're drawing on ideas perhaps that you've seen and you've held on to them for some reason, or things that you've read about, and these certain things will pop into your head, and before you know it, you've got it down on paper. And it's almost like a discovery, which is one of the things I like about it. It's the opposite to the way I was taught to paint. I mean, I was always taught to use a sketchbook and to work out my ideas in a sketchbook first. And when I was at college and studying art, it would annoy me that I couldn't just start work. I had an idea or an urge to paint or create something, and I just wanted to get on with that and put it down on paper. And my tutors would always say, "Oh, we need to see your development. We need to see how this idea developed," and it often annoyed me to the point where I would go back after I'd created a piece. I would go back and then draw in my sketchbook and then show that to my tutor, pretending that was the working out that I'd done beforehand, which was naughty really, but it was the only way I could work. It's only recently that I've started developing ideas in a sketchbook and enjoying it. I think maybe I was a bit rebellious and I didn't like the idea of having to do something that felt quite alien to me at that time. So far I've been using watercolour, but in a minute I'm going to start using these acrylic markers. They're made by Crawford and Black, and I got these in the Works, which is a cheap sort of bookshop come craft shop that you can find virtually anywhere on the UK high streets. So I'm going to use a bit of this in this painting. It is soluble, just water soluble, and I've got the pastel selection, but there's I think there's 4 others. There's an earth one, and I think there might even be a portrait one, I'm not sure, but it is acrylic. So you should be able to work over that when it's dry. And it doesn't go through, if you're careful, and work over it with some pencil, which is what I'm intending to do when I've finished putting this together. So yeah, so that's why I was a bit late coming to the party when it came to sketchbooks. So I really didn't get into using sketchbooks, and I didn't really see the point of them at the time when I was studying at college, because I knew what I wanted to paint and what I wanted to do, and I just wanted to get on with it, and I didn't want to have to go through all the rigmarole of working out in a sketchbook first. So I blagged it for a while and ended up carrying on and working on in my own way by just going straight for it without using a sketchbook. But I appreciate sketchbook work now more than I ever have. So I'm going to try and map in this face, and I'm going to use, I actually think I'm going to use some pencil, because I want the face to be quite pale. So I've got a nice Coloursoft Derwent Coloursoft Pale Peach. I'm going to try that over the wax and see if that will work. Seems to be working. Although I want to use, I quite like to use some ink for the face, and very lightly put that in and see how it copes with being over a wax surface, and just hint at the nose. And see how that works. This technique, using ink and then going over it with watercolour or going over it with water, is obviously, you probably already know, is called ink and wash. And I really like this technique, although I think it's kind of not been proven to be as popular as it was when I was at college. There used to be a lot more of this type of work about. And I think if I touch this up with a little bit of water, not too much, and get a tissue handy in case it runs too much. But I love the way that the ink runs, and you can create shadow just by the way you let the ink run. You need to be able to have quite a bit of control, because depending on what paper you use, and this sea white is quite absorbent, but some watercolour papers are, especially if they're rough, the ink will pool into the little recesses, and you'll make sort of real muddy puddles. So you do need quite a bit of control to make sure you don't get that muddiness. Now I think it really does need, once it's properly dry, it's not quite dry, it really does need some white to highlight areas of the face. It's starting to look quite dark. So yeah, so ink and wash is one of my favourite techniques, and I hope I'll be able to show you some better examples than the one I'm actually making now of how it can be used. So I'm just going to stop talking and let you watch the rest of this painting, and we'll maybe add some acrylics at the end, in which case I'll show you what I'm doing then. Here I'm just going to use some white gouache and use it to make some shapes, some marks on the paper using this brush. And gouache, as I'm sure you know, when used very lightly, can dry quite soft. So I'm hoping that some of these marks will actually mellow down a little bit and not be quite so strong, and give a feeling of movement across the paper, across the drawing. think it's interesting to just sit down with your paints and paper and whatever it is you use, whatever medium you use, and just draw. Just let your subconscious give you an image, or give you something that you can just play with. Obviously play is very important in making art, because that's how you learn, that's how you find your style, your way of working. But it's also interesting from a psychological point of view, because when you play without expectation, so you're just playing, enjoying putting down paint or putting down colour and making marks on the paper or the canvas, then it's fascinating what comes out, what you allow, what your subconscious dictates that you will make, you'll produce. And it's always been fascinating to me just to see, look back at times, because I used to keep a diary, and to look back at certain times and see what it is that you've been making. And it's quite often surprising that what you make is in some way related to what's going on in your life at the time, but obviously it's almost like it's encoded in some way. So you have to sort of try and work out what it is that your subconscious is aiming at or trying to communicate to you. And that's one of the fascinating things about working in this way. When you're not really overly concerned with what the outcome is going to be. I mean, this is just in my sketchbook. It's probably not going to be seen by anyone else but me, other than the fact that I'm showing it to you now for the purpose of explaining why I work in this way sometimes. So I hope you found it interesting, just to see how I work, and how I create work that I don't have a specific end for. There's no end for this piece. It's not going to be a finished painting. It's not going to be offered up as for sale or anything like that. It's just me enjoying putting down paint onto paper and seeing what comes out at the end. Because apart from the fact that I had created a background, just a random background beforehand, so that I had something to work on, there was no preconceived idea for this painting. It's just something that I've done while I've been chatting to you. And I might even come back in, and that's one of the good things about working, one of the nice things about working in this way, is that you can often come back to something and work it up into a more complete and finished piece, which is interesting, because you might find something within a piece that you've made in this way that triggers a more complete piece, or even starts a series of work. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it. I may do another one like this and show you how I progress it into something that may even end up on canvas. So see you next time. Bye.